15. Avery Robinson. Complete chaos broke out between 6 family members during a trip to Disneyland in 2019 when they all began fighting with each other in the park's Toontown area. Footage of the melee shows a woman spitting in a man's face before the man punched her multiple times. He then accused another woman in the group of attacking his mother and began shoving her repeatedly. Several bystanders tried to intervene, including one witness who moved a child out of the path of the fighting adults. Another person put one of the brawlers in a chokehold in an attempt to get him under control. During the video, 35-year-old Las Vegas resident Avery Robinson can be heard saying, "I'm ready to go to jail tonight," and referencing a Southern California gang. Despite the evidence against them, everyone involved in the fight reportedly denied any involvement when they first spoke with officers. Avery was hit with 5 felony charges, including assault, making threats, endangering children, and assaulting an employee with his vehicle. He pleaded guilty to several counts and was sentenced to 6 months in jail. Avery's sister, Andrea Robinson, was charged with 5 misdemeanors for attacking him and 2 others during the fight. Her husband, Damon Petrie, was charged with battery for allegedly punching Avery's girlfriend in the face. The couple failed to appear in court, and warrants were issued for their arrest. 14. Tomorrowland stabbing. Disneyland in Anaheim marked a dismal first in 1981 when someone was stabbed to death in the Tomorrowland section of the park. It was the first murder to occur since Disneyland's opening 25 years earlier in 1955. 18-year-old Mel Yorba was visiting the park on a Saturday evening with some friends when he got into an argument during a private party. He was allegedly heavily intoxicated when he was accused of inappropriately touching 28-year-old James O'Driscoll's girlfriend. While it's unclear exactly what happened, witnesses reported that O'Driscoll demanded an apology and Yorba responded by punching him. A fistfight ensued, and it ended when Yorba was stabbed twice in the chest. O'Driscoll fled the scene on foot, throwing the murder weapon into Sleeping Beauty's moat and throwing his bloody shirt into a trash can along the way. Instead of calling the local paramedics, Disney staff members dispatched a company-employed nurse to the scene. She was unable to treat Yorba's wounds on her own, and he died from his injuries. According to Groovy History, conventional ambulances and police forces weren't allowed inside Disney at the time because of the fear that their presence would shatter the air of fantasy. By the time authorities were alerted to the incident and sent an unmarked van to transport Yorba to the hospital, it was too late to save him. O'Driscoll was charged with murder, and 25-year-old Julie Holdener was also arrested in connection with the stabbing. The charges against Holdener were eventually dropped due to a lack of evidence, while O'Driscoll was sentenced to 16 years in prison after 2 trials. Yorba's family sued Disney for wrongful death, alleging that Yorba may have survived his injuries if help had arrived sooner. Disneyland officials denied the claim and stated their intention to fight the lawsuit, adding that they would not settle out of court. The lawsuit dragged on for several years before a jury awarded Yorba's family $600,000 in damages. 13. Missing guest turns up alive and naked. During a trip to Disneyland Paris in 2019, a 32-year-old Swiss engineer took LSD. It wasn't long before he fell into a man-made lake at Adventureland, prompting a frantic 130-person search. His girlfriend grew increasingly nervous as the park began to close and he still hadn't been found. She let staff members know that her boyfriend was still missing, and the search continued for hours with no luck. It even grew to include police dogs and a helicopter equipped with a thermal camera. While it was unclear whether the girlfriend took LSD, the French newspaper Le Parisien reported that she did not seem to be in possession of all her means. In other words, she wasn't completely with it. The search finally ended during the early morning hours when a man driving home from work in the nearby town of Chessy spotted a naked man in the middle of the road. Alarmed by what he saw, the driver, Benoit, stopped and got out of his car. He told La Parisienne that as he approached, he noticed that the naked man was covered in scratches. He was completely dry, didn't speak French, and didn't remember how he ended up where he was. The confused park-goer eventually remembered that he'd taken LSD and that his girlfriend was probably worried about him, but he couldn't remember her phone number when Benoit offered to call her. After realizing that the man was harmless, Benoit grabbed some clothes for him and drove him to the edge of the park, where he was soon discovered by searchers. He was initially arrested for using drugs, but authorities ultimately decided to let him go with a warning and released him from custody after he spent a few hours in jail. In a statement to the press, Disneyland Paris shrugged the incident off as no big deal, saying that it didn't cause any significant problems and that most guests didn't even realize there was a problem. During another bizarre LSD-fueled incident that occurred during the 1960s at Disneyland in California, a member of a band that was playing at the park snuck away to indulge in the hallucinogenic drug. He undressed completely, threw his musical instrument into the water, and swam naked to Tom Sawyer Island, where he tried to direct traffic. It wasn't long before panicked motorists alerted security and a guard picked the man up. 12. Francis McMillian. 53-year-old Francis McMillian learned the hard way that misbehaving at Disneyland can get you slapped with a lifetime ban. During a visit to the Hollywood Studios park in 2019, she allegedly slapped a taxi driver several times for telling her he doesn't smoke when she asked him for a cigarette. The driver, Adele Mahmood, told Yahoo Lifestyle that McMillian was completely drunk and out of her mind, and that she had no control. A security guard witnessed the altercation and called the police, telling them that McMillian was a threat to guests. According to an arrest report, she became belligerent when an officer asked her to sit down. The report also describes McMillian as unsteady on her feet, slurring, and with bloodshot eyes. She allegedly admitted several times that she was drunk and demanded a cigarette from responding officers, saying that she refused to talk with them until she could smoke. When an officer asked her for her ID, she reportedly threw her purse at them and said, "Here." Police also accused McMillian of kicking an officer twice while being taken into custody and cursing loudly in front of families. She was charged with battery on a law enforcement officer and disorderly intoxication and was banned from all Disney parks for life. 11. Big Thunder Mountain Deaths. While riding the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad roller coaster at Disneyland in 2003, 22-year-old Marcelo Torres died in a horrific accident that his family's lawyer would later argue could have been prevented. Torres was riding in the first passenger car of the train, which was led by a pretend locomotive. During the ride, the locomotive's rear wheels came off and an axle jammed in one of the track's railroad ties, causing the locomotive to go airborne at a tunnel entrance. The locomotive crashed into the top of the tunnel, and the car that Torres was riding in slammed into its undercarriage. Torres died from blunt force trauma to the chest and lacerations on his lungs, which caused massive bleeding. 10 others were also injured. Officials blamed the accident on poor maintenance and the failure to provide machinists with proper guidelines. Workers had failed to tighten 2 screws properly, leading to the devastating crash on the train's 13th run of the day. During the first 12 runs, workers noticed an unusual noise. But according to a statement, employees were taught to ignore strange noises on the ride, or at least not to assume that a strange noise meant something was wrong. In a report, the state's Occupational Safety Agency recommended that Disney retrain its mechanists and rewrite its guidelines with clarity, including an instruction for mechanists to take action if they hear an unusual noise. Torres' family sued the park for wrongful death, and the matter was settled for an undisclosed sum. Unlike some other cases you'll hear about today, Disney fully accepted responsibility for its role in the young man's death and apologized to his loved ones. Rumors claim that Marcelo's ghost has been seen around the ride, and that his spirit particularly enjoys hanging out on a bench near the roller coaster during the evening. 10. Special Olympics delegates vanish. The 2022 Special Olympics took place at Disney World in Orlando. Just a day after the Games began, 6 of the event's Haitian delegates went missing. Ranging in age from 18 to 32, they were scheduled to participate in soccer games that they did not show up for, and they also failed to board their flights back to Haiti. The delegates were last seen turning in their hotel room keys at around 2:30 in the afternoon on June 6th, yet their belongings were left behind. The Osceola County Sheriff's Office announced the disappearances the next day, stating that 5 of the individuals were not Special Olympics athletes. In a statement, the agency described the incident as an isolated occurrence and said that no foul play was suspected. When reporters asked why investigators did not suspect foul play, an agency spokesperson declined to comment, citing the ongoing nature of the investigation. The next update on the case came almost a week later, when authorities announced that a 7th delegate, 25-year-old Louis Jacques Villegin, had vanished. He was last seen on June 11th, 5 days after the first 6 delegates disappeared, getting off a bus at Disney's All-Star Sports Resort at around 4:30 p.m. Wilkins was scheduled to fly back to Haiti the next morning, but never boarded his plane. Sheriff Marcos Lopez told reporters that several of the Haitian delegates who did not go missing said that they didn't want to return to Haiti, suggesting that perhaps the missing delegates planned to stay in America and start new lives. But the circumstances surrounding their disappearance remains largely shrouded in mystery, and it's unclear whether their missing persons cases are still active. 9. Pirates of the Caribbean poisoning. Several dozen park visitors were on Disneyland's Pirates of the Caribbean attraction one Saturday night in 1992 when the ride suddenly stopped. They sat there for nearly 5 minutes without an explanation being offered, while employees walked by with handkerchiefs over their faces and evacuated people who were waiting in line. While waiting in the dark, the guests on the ride suddenly became ill. When they were finally evacuated, several people exited the attraction with noticeable skin and breathing issues. Around 30 visitors received treatment at a first aid station. 6 people who experienced the most severe symptoms were treated at the hospital for coughing, tight chests, nausea, skin blotches, and burning eyes. According to one witness, a patient on a cot was vomiting uncontrollably. 2 of the patients who went to the emergency room told the Los Angeles Times that according to doctors, a mace-like substance, but not actual mace, caused their illness. A Disney representative said that they were unable to confirm whether this was true. Meanwhile, victims of the mysterious incident criticized Disney for its response to the emergency. They said that employees should have at least turned the lights on while those stranded on the ride waited for help. Company spokesman Greg Albrecht denied that the several-minute delay that the riders experienced was caused by the unexplained gas release. He said that there's always a 2-minute delay at the end of the ride, while the boats are hooked up for their final ascent to the exit platform. The guests also claimed that when they were finally evacuated, nobody guided them to the first aid station. Moreover, people questioned why hazardous substance experts from the Anaheim Fire Department were not dispatched to the scene. The ride was reopened later that night, while those affected by the alleged poisoning continued to suffer from residual symptoms for several days. Some victims even complained that their condition had worsened, with one woman telling The Times that her face felt like it was on fire. The source of the sudden illness remains unclear to this day. 8. Parade death. Parades are supposed to be joyous events, but the event became synonymous with death for one family after 38-year-old father of 2 Javier Cruz lost his life during a Disney parade in 2004. Cruz had worked hard at Disney World for 8 years leading up to the horrific accident. He was about to enter the Magic Kingdom park dressed as Pluto the dog when a parade float crushed him in a backstage area. Park spokesperson Rena Callahan told the press that she wasn't sure if any visitors saw the tragedy. She said that as far as she knew, it was the first accident of its kind to ever happen at the park. An investigation found that Cruz's foot got caught between 2 sections of a 3-part float, causing him to lose his balance and fall to the ground. The 3rd part of the float ran him over. Using a forklift and a hydraulic lift, employees scrambled to free Cruz, but it was unfortunately too late to save him. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, better known as OSHA, cited Disney for what it described as a serious violation that put employees at the risk of being hit by motor vehicles. In addition to being disciplined, the company was ordered to pay a $6,300 fine. 7. Drunk Disney Visitor vs. Police. One day in early 2023, a man later identified as 30-year-old Edward Stevenson was reportedly seen acting belligerent and cursing in front of children at Disney Springs. Employees asked him to leave, but he allegedly refused and began to harass them. An arrest report stated that Stevenson's brother tried calming him down, but his efforts were unsuccessful, so he left the situation alone. Family members were called to pick him up, but refused because they were disappointed in his behavior. Someone called law enforcement, and Orange County deputies responded to the scene. They initially led Stevenson outside the park so he could call an Uber. He was also accused of walking in the direct path of families and stopping to record and cruise at deputies while they told him to keep heading toward the exit. Once outside the park, Stevenson allegedly refused to call an Uber and became so unruly the police decided to take him into custody. According to the arrest report, it took 3 deputies to subdue and handcuff him. He reportedly told them he was a registered nurse and that they'd better hope they never end up at his emergency room. 6. Trespassers at Discovery Island. Between 1974 and 1999, a small 11.5-acre island in Bay Lake, Florida, showcased rare birds and other exotic animals to Disney World visitors. Known as Discovery Island, it operated for 25 years before it shuttered its doors and moved its animals to the Magic Kingdom. While the exact reasons for its closure are unknown, poor visitor numbers and high maintenance costs are thought to be contributing factors. Since then, Discovery Island has remained abandoned. All of its buildings were left behind, as well as a lot of everyday items like cans of soda and Polaroid photos, as if everyone left in a hurry and never fully cleaned the former park out. It's become an attraction among urban explorers, including a blogger named Shane Perez, who swam through alligator-infested waters with his friends to reach the island in 2009. One of the first things they noticed was the sound of what seemed to them like thousands of birds. Not much longer after that, they encountered a plethora of angry vultures. The group found that electricity still worked, which seemed odd among the overgrowth, garbage, and overall dilapidation that had taken over the park since its abandonment. Perez was ultimately banned from Disney World for his trespassing adventure. In 2020, a 42-year-old YouTuber from Alabama named Richard McGuire was caught camping out on Discovery Island after he triggered a wildlife trail camera. When police found him, he told them that he didn't realize he was trespassing, despite the numerous no trespassing signs, and described his surroundings as a tropical paradise. The man said he'd planned to stay at the campsite for about a week, but his trip was cut short by the arrest. He pleaded no contest to trespassing and was banned from Disney parks for life. 5. Death on Space Mountain. During a trip to Disney World's Magic Kingdom theme park in 2015, a 55-year-old Tennessee woman named Pamela Lynn Haynes lost consciousness on the famous Space Mountain indoor roller coaster. She was rushed to the hospital but never regained consciousness and ultimately passed away from her symptoms. Her causes of death were ruled as cardiopulmonary arrest and septic shock. According to a doctor, Haynes had a history of heart problems including hypertension, congestive heart failure, and COPD. She was among 3 park visitors who've died on Space Mountain, all of whom had pre-existing heart conditions. People with blood pressure, heart, and motion sickness tendencies are cautioned against riding the roller coaster, and with good reason, as cases like this prove. The tragedy involving Haynes came the year after 2 women died on the gentler It's a Small World and Toy Story Midway Mania rides. In both cases, the rides were operating normally, indicating that there was no wrongdoing on Disney's behalf. 4. Thwarted terror attack. A potentially deadly disaster was narrowly avoided in 1995, according to the Baltimore Sun, which reported that federal authorities foiled a terroristic plot to release poison gas at Disneyland. The news outlet reported that just days before the park's Easter rush, officials at Los Angeles International Airport apprehended 2 Japanese travelers who were carrying information and a videotape on how to make a highly toxic nerve gas. The suspects were allegedly members of the Aum Supreme Truth cult that had released sarin into the Tokyo subway system just weeks earlier. 12 people were killed and thousands more were harmed in the attack. According to The Sun, Disneyland executives were the first to alert authorities to the possibility of a planned terrorist attack after receiving a letter that something might happen. Tokyo officials also raised the alarm after learning that 2 men associated with the cult had boarded flights to Los Angeles. The day after news of the plot broke, authorities denied the Sun report and said that rumors of the gas attack were a complete hoax and were never part of a serious plan. In response, the Sun insisted that the article it published was completely factual. It's not unusual for threats to be called into theme parks, according to federal officials, who further noted that most are quickly discredited as hoaxes. To this day, the circumstances surrounding the alleged planned gas attack at Disneyland are unclear. 3. Mortal suffering on the Matterhorn bobsled. 48-year-old Regina Young became the 9th person to die at Disneyland in Anaheim, California in 1984, less than 30 years after the park's grand opening. She was riding alone near the back of an 8-passenger vehicle on the Matterhorn bobsled when she fell out onto the track. The incident occurred roughly halfway down the ride's mountain, and Young was struck by an oncoming bobsled that was traveling at 20 miles per hour. She was killed instantly. Young was at the park with 4 friends who were seated in front of her and didn't see her fall out. They didn't realize Young was missing until the end of the ride, by which point she'd already been hit. Officials were mystified by how and why Young fell out of the bobsled. Nothing was mechanically wrong with the ride, and her seatbelt was unfastened but not broken. Workers would have buckled her in before beginning the ride, according to Disneyland spokesman Bob Roth. Young's family sued Disneyland for the accident, alleging that park employees failed to ensure that her seatbelt was properly fastened. The 2 parties settled for an undisclosed sum, and Disney changed the type of seatbelt that was used on the ride. 9 deaths at Disneyland over a 30-year period may sound like a lot, but as Roth pointed out, more than 230 million people visited the park during those years. While it's sad for anyone to die at an amusement park, it's also incredibly rare. But this wasn't the first or only accident to occur on the Matterhorn bobsled ride. Several years before Young's death in the 1970s, an employee fell out of the ride while trying to retrieve a guest's wig that had fallen off during the ride. At the time, workers were required to find lost belongings by riding the bobsled and attempting to hook the item with a straightened coat hanger. After spotting the wig on their first pass through the ride, staff members made a second run. One staff member leaned out of the vehicle in an attempt to hook the wig and fell out. She plunged 50 feet to the ground and survived with a broken pelvis, shoulders, and ribs. The outlook was initially bleak, with doctors acknowledging that she was lucky to survive but would probably never walk again. Against all odds, she regained her mobility and continued working at Disney World for years to come. 2. Fugitive found at Disney World. Quashon Burton was wanted by federal authorities for a year before he was captured at Disney World in late 2022. He'd gone on the run from New York City, and by some wildly unlikely chance, a federal officer working his case recognized him at the amusement park. Burton faced allegations that he fraudulently acquired COVID-19 related financial benefits from the government. When he realized he was wanted, he fled from his Brooklyn home. It was only by chance that Federal Post Inspector Jeff Andre happened to be vacationing at Disney with his family, and that they decided to go to Animal Kingdom that day. Andre recognized Burton based on a distinctive tattoo on his neck. Prosecutors accused the alleged fraudster of using at least 4 people's identities without their knowledge or permission in order to obtain forgivable business loans from the government. Burton allegedly received around $150,000 that he wasn't entitled to, and he was also accused of using multiple false identities during his time on the run. Andre alerted the local sheriff's office, and deputies caught up with Burton about an hour later at a bus stop. He reportedly refused to show his ID and resisted arrest, but was taken into custody. Burton continued refusing to admit who he was, even after his identity was confirmed through fingerprints. There was ultimately nothing he could do to avoid facing the justice system, and his leisurely vacation from law enforcement was brought to an abrupt end. His case appears to be ongoing. 1. Deadly monorail crash. Disney World's famed monorail is a staple of the park and a main mode of transportation for getting from one part of the massive resort to another. It made headlines in 2023 as Florida Governor Ron DeSantis considered signing a new law that would give the state transportation department oversight of the system. While some consider this a senseless flex of government power, lawmakers insist it's for safety purposes. The Disney World monorail has an impeccable safety record, with only one fatal incident occurring since its opening in 1971. It happened during the pre-dawn hours on July 5, 2009, when Monorail Pink and Monorail Purple collided at the resort's Ticket and Transport Center. One of the trains rammed into the back of the other, killing 21-year-old operator Austin Vunnenberg. 7 others, including 6 visitors and 1 employee, survived and were released at the scene after being evaluated by paramedics. The accident was largely blamed on a miscommunication between operators. Before the collision, up to 4 passengers were allowed in the pilot's cabin. Afterward, the company quickly changed its policy to no longer allow anyone but the operator into this section of the train. Several other changes were also made, including the installation of security cameras at monorail stations, along with new policies to ensure safety. 13 years later, in 2022, an employee who was working near the accident scene told BuzzFeed that they struggle with ongoing PTSD due to the horror that they witnessed that day. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be banned from our favorite amusement park for life, or banned from online shopping for 5 years? Let us know in the comments below, but first be sure to subscribe. See you next time, bye!